The next lecture is in memory of Vladimir Lenin, a Russian communist revolutionary, politician, and political theorist. Ideologically a Marxist, his policies and theories became known as Leninism. This lecture is titled, "Is Communist Rule Nepal Red, Pink, or Blue?" This lecture will be delivered by Dr. Dipak Gyawali, Chairman, National Water Conservation Foundation, and former Minister, Government of Nepal. This lecture will be chaired by Lord Meghnad Desai, Emeritus Professor, London School of Economics. Can I request our chair and our speaker to please come on stage? Lord Desai, please take over the proceedings.
Is it not? No. Thank you. Can you hear this? No, it's off. Switch. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Well, first of all, an explanation that Samir Amin is not here because he could not get a visa to get from Senegal to here. So apologies on behalf of all of us. We would have loved to have heard Samir Amin, and that's a loss to all of us. But we are compensated for that by listening to Dipak Gyawali, my friend Dipak Gyawali, because I have known him now for more than 20 years when we were together on an international advisory committee on climate change in the 1990s. Even before climate started changing. So you can see, Dipak is a rare person in being an engineer. He actually knows how things are done, unlike me. But he is an engineer and he's an expert on water management. He's a deeply committed person to improving the lot of not just his fellow citizens in Nepal, but everywhere else. And you look up his biography as written down there. I'm not going to repeat that. But he's also had the practical experience of having been a minister. I don't know if many others among us have been ministers. So that makes you unique. And I look forward to your lecture. Dipak, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghnad. Samir Amin is impossible to, replace, and I am a poor substitute. I was hoping to listen to him because I am responsible in Nepal for getting the Maoist editor of a magazine to actually read Samir Amin's Future of Maoism. After he read it, he came back and said, "This guy would think that we are not even Maoists." I said, "You're right." Okay. A bit about Lenin first. I lived in his country, and I'm probably one of the few people in this hall who has actually had a darshan of his body in the Red Square, as also Ho Chi Minh. One may agree or disagree with Lenin, but the fact is that he, in Russian history, like Peter the Great before him, yanked his country out of a very primitive kind of a state to something completely different. Now, whether we like that or not is a different issue, but he did it, and he's part of Russian history, indelible part of history, getting Russia to be well on the path of industrialization. In fact, I grew up studying in the Soviet Union, engineering, where the Moscow Energy Institute had a big banner as you entered the hall, his famous line, "Communism is equal to Soviet power plus electrification of the whole country." Now, one can appreciate whatever he has done in history without being a Marxist, let alone a Leninist or a communist. Now, what I'm going to present to you here is about Nepal as an example, and it's part of my larger ongoing effort right now, which might eventually end up in a book, I don't know when, about my trying to understand why democracies go bad. You know, whether they are socialist democracies, communist democracies, liberal democracies, in the third world, democracies have gone bad very often, sadly. And I'm one of those, as the title says, who finds things of value in what Marx has said, you know, but don't subscribe to what his self-appointed disciples have done in his name. Now, I pick up from Lord Desai's book, where Marx is supposed to have said, when the German Socialist Democrats, I believe, tried to, you know, put him on their banner or his party, their party, this thing, he said, as far as I know, I am not a Marxist. It's a famous saying of Marx. Now, my conclusion from that is, if Marx says he's not a Marxist, anybody else who says they're Marxist are not. And my good friend Michael Thompson in UK has another saying that parallels this. Any country with the word democratic in its title is not. Now, what you see here is this jugaad, you know, that I mentioned yesterday. It's taken on the Rajasthan-Gujarat border. Now, I've done eagle eye science, but I consider myself a toad's eye scientist. That is, we like to get on the ground and look at how things actually are. If you are an eagle eye scientist and looking only at satellite data and all that fancy stuff, you will never see this. You will see this as a truck. But it's not a truck, it's an irrigation pump. And you have to go down there and interview the 12-year-old boy driving it, with no license, obviously, and this doesn't have a license plate either, that it's something else. It's a very rich phenomenon of rural creativity going on here. Something else is happening in this kind of economies, which just cannot be captured by that other kind of science. Which is why what I'm going to talk to you about today is my problem with using conventional language to explore a contradiction. And what is my contradiction I'm struggling with? Why are Nepal's communists hardly red, some pink, and mostly blue? Most Nepal Communist Party, United Marxist-Leninists, which is the one in power, together with Nepal Communist Party Maoist, or as people call it, cash Maoist. There's cash Maoist and dash Maoists. Cash Maoists have all the money, Prachanda Bauram. The dash Maoists have rejected this constitution and are thinking of going back, or have actually gone back to People's War. Now, there was a cartoon some years ago in a very small Nepali newspaper, and that highlights the contradiction I'm trying to explain. It was a two-panel cartoon, and the first panel had, you know, these communists in the jungle, you know, gun in the back, you know, a cap with a red star, and reading a book. And the book said, behind a bush, reading a book saying, the book said, Das Kapital. And the next panel had these communists in a SUV vehicle with big, nice, fancy bungalows with satellite dish on top, you know, and the caption below said, Capital Das. Now, those of you who don't understand Nepali or Hindi, that basically translates as slave of capital. Okay. That is the contradiction, and this is what I'm trying to explain. I wrote a piece 3 years after the Maoists began their People's War. Prachanda was this mythical creature. Nobody knew what he was like and all that. And an American communist, Lee Onesto, managed to get his interview. Don't ask me how, he was supposed to be underground. Well, it turns out he was actually living in Noida in Delhi. And the interview was 24 pages, and the editor gave it to a friend of mine to write a comment on it. And he said, you know, nobody can understand this who hasn't, you know, got the Marxist jargon. You know. Ask Dipak to do it. I didn't have the time and all that, but I said, I'll look at it. I mean, it's interesting. I read these 24 pages, and as I read them, I got more and more shocked that the man didn't seem to have the basic understanding of Marxism. And here was a raging people's war going on in Nepal in his name. In fact, his party, you know, didn't call itself, its program Leninism or Marxism, they called it Prachanda Path, Prachandaism. Okay. Now, I wrote that piece, and my critical, I have several criticisms of that, but one of my critical point was, they were waging a war against what they call neo-feudal, neo-colonial, whatever outfit. The trouble was, now, I, as most of you must have been in meetings, international conferences, where people just can't define what feudalism is. After 4 days, they're still arguing about what feudalism is. But a very simple explanation I do have that I use and I find useful is a country feudal or not? It would go back to look at the budget, the revenue of the state, and see where the state derives most of its revenues. In Nepal's case, when the Communist Party of Nepal was founded just after the Second World War, in Calcutta and Varanasi, I might add, Nepali state could be called feudal, as most of the state revenue came from land tax and land whatever. By the time I wrote that article in 1999, I think it was, 98, Nepal government's revenue from land had dwindled down to less than 1%, and over 85% of all its revenue came from 5 customs entry points. What did this tell me? I argued that the country had long moved from being feudal, with the state now being completely in the hands of what are called comprador bourgeois, the trading class. And that was reflected subsequently in our Constituent Assembly and Parliament, when every party, including Prachanda's Maoist party, Nepali Congress, the United Marxist-Leninists, they could nominate a certain number of people to the parliament, besides those who won direct elections. From the proportionate number of votes you could elect, all of them ended up nominating scions of trading houses, including the Maoists. Okay. That is probably the greatest proof. And now from that point on, till April 10th, 2012, when the Maoist combatants were still in UN cantonments, Baburam was the prime minister, Prachanda his party supremo, fearing revolt in the cantonment of their own communist Maoist fighters, ordered the Nepal army at midnight to go in one fell swoop and clean up the camps. I talked to the Nepal army colonel who led that and said, well, what is it? And he said, we fought these guys for 10 years and couldn't, completely eliminate, far from eliminating them. So the UN had to come and put them in camps. Now their own commanders tell us to go and get rid of these buggers. Why wouldn't we do it? So these are the contradictions that we are living with in Nepal. And this is what I'm trying to address. Now, what I'm trying to do is, first of all, I'm trying to distinguish Marx, because some of us find elements of insights in Marx that we think are very useful to try and explain today's society. So to do that, if I fall into the old whatever jargon, I'll never get there. So I'm trying to distinguish Marx from his self-declared apostles. And in that, I'm drawing on very unlikely sources. I'm not sure where I'll end up with this. But the ones I'm drawing on is, for instance, this Iranian sociologist, Ahmad Sadri, and his amazing book, Max Weber and the Sociology of Intellectuals. And in that, he makes a critical distinction between what he calls thinkers and implementers among intellectuals. And among thinkers and implementers, he distinguishes between Jesus Christ and Saint Paul, distinguishes between Ramakrishna, doesn't do that, but it follows, Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, Buddha or Ashok. And similarly, you could probably distinguish between Marx and Lenin. And one was a thinker, a system builder, and the other was an implementer, a politician to boot, okay, who had to do his politics by, not abstract stuff, but some very real things on the ground. Now, just as there are many schools of Buddhist and Christian thoughts, there are many strands of Marxian interpretation going around. Each politician probably has their own kind of interpretation. Now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, actually, I agree with Lord Desai in his book, Marx's Revenge, that it's a liberating moment for us who want to use Marxian thinking. It's a very liberating moment, because it's as if Marxian thinking has been liberated with the collapse of the Berlin Wall from a Stalinist gulag, And this is very liberating. Now we can frankly use Marxism and not have to worry about, being labeled KGB agents or whatever. Now, the other strand I'm using is historian Stavrianos, L.S. Stavrianos. He was actually a Balkan historian in Northwestern University or somewhere. I met him in La Jolla in California. I had long, long conversations with him. His book, Global Rift, The Third World Comes of Age, in 1980, I believe, from New York, published, which is dedicated to Emiliano Zapata, is an amazing book in that it is a history book, but it is not a history of a country or a region. It is a history of the process of third worldization. You may say it is, you know, those of us who have read Marx know that there is something that rings a bell there. It is not a Marxist piece of writing, but he does an amazing piece of work in explaining the birth of this new animal called capitalism, which did not exist in human history for several thousand years. And according to Stavrianos, the historian, it was born exactly in the year 1500, according to him, in Holland and England simultaneously, almost. And he does that. Why it is important for me as an institutional economist also is that, like, I find historians important because institutions to me are a product of history. You can have a Bihar irrigation department and you can have a department of irrigation in California and United States. They have the same name, but their evolution is so different, they do completely different things. So this is extremely important to understand institutions. You have to understand history. What Stavrianos does in 4 amazing interlinked steps is first identify the Black Death, shortage of labor in Europe, and how this prodded the entire society to invest in technology. Simultaneously, what happened was there was a freeing of European minds from church stranglehold after the collapse of the final crusades, which led to science and technology. Same time, there was a lifting of a ban on usury or interest taking, which paralleled then the formation of limited liability joint stock companies, also a new animal in global history. It meant that, small savings could be pooled together to do big things. It was quite an amazing transmission. That's what East India Company, Dutch East India Company, all kinds of companies were all about. Okay. And then finally his amazing insight that all this was coupled with trade in necessities versus trade in luxuries. Trade in luxuries has happened since prehistoric man trading in obsidian. That's not the point. But when you start trading in necessities like food, clothes, and energy and things like that, the terms of trade matter, and those who control the terms of trade end up controlling everything. And that is what he describes as the process of third worldization. East Europe being the first third worldized part of the world, followed by North America that got completely swamped by the first world, followed by Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And he talks about the only exception in history being the Japanese exception. It's an amazing book, but there are several insights one can draw from it. Then the third kind of strand I draw on is Karl Polanyi, with his redistribution, exchange, reciprocity triad, where society really functions in a market mechanism if it is not to lapse into fascism. Stephen Luke's amazing study of power, where he describes coercive power, persuasive power, and ethical power, which exactly matches Polanyi's triad. And I found it strangely, because I do study a lot of ancient philosophy, I find it, forget Vedanta, Vedanta is too otherworldly, but if you look at Samkhya philosophy, this triad of power, coercive, persuasive, and ethical, immediately balances or reflects in the Samkhya system of classification of Tamasic Shakti, Rajasic Shakti, and Sattvic Shakti. Now, what this does is, when we look back into institutional political economy, we find out which kind of organizations have which kind of power and how much of it. That becomes extremely central. Very rarely do you get an organizational outfit that has all three. One exception was Mao, who controlled all three aspects. The moral, the political, economic, and the coercive power of the People's Liberation Army. He controlled all three right up till his death. Okay. Gandhi had tremendous ethical power, did not really have coercive power, didn't have an army at that time, and also didn't have much money. The British Empire had it all. Okay. Now, this parallels to me, and I'm a cultural theorist, parallels completely exactly what Mary Douglas does with cultural theory. That comes to me from my work in water, groundwater. This is a cartoon we made after doing work in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Mehsana district, Tamil Nadu, and South Nepal. And we made this cartoon and presented it to Mary Douglas. By the way, it was in our living room for a while. And cultural theory has 4 styles of organizing. And it's critical of the dualism in social sciences that goes only from market individualism to state hierarchism, arguing that there is egalitarianism and fatalism as well. Okay? And this is the 4 responses to the social responses to groundwater overdraft. You have the individualists just pumping away, everybody's well is going dry. You have the village patwari up in the northeast end, arguing for more rules and regulations. Government of India is still trying to make a groundwater law, and I don't think they'll ever succeed. How do you regulate 60 million pumps in 60 million backyards? Very difficult. You need some laws, but we're not sure what. And then you have the activists, going on about all kinds of things, from arsenic in groundwater to groundwater table decline to all sorts of things, and saline intrusion. And of course, you have the fatalists who can't farm anymore because there's no water, and they all go to the slums of Bombay. Now, these 4 styles of organizing comes from 2 simple, what we call discriminators. Well, in the y-axis, whether your transactions are symmetrical or asymmetrical, and on the x-axis, whether within your organizing style you have fettered competition or unfettered competition. And in each one of them, you easily get 4 permutation, which leads to individualism, individualism, egalitarianism, hierarchism, and fatalism. Now, what these 4 styles do is they generate 4 very different responses to any kind of a problem. In the groundwater, I already showed you what it does. But the important thing for us to realize is being where you are determines how you look at things. And that means, for me, when I look at most of the water conflicts, the dam conflicts and all that, you find out that your definition of the problem differs. Now, we argue that if your definition of the problem differs, market will define it as one kind of, the same problem as differently, the hierarchs, the governments will define it differently, and activists will define it very, very differently. I'll show you an example. If you leave the fatalist out, you essentially get a 3-legged policy stool. Policy, of course, being defined, I believe, as Henry Kissinger did most beautifully, as a formula for the use of power. And as I told you, what kind of power? What bureaucratic hierarchy, leave fatalists aside, they are cognized and strategized upon by the other 3 active ones, okay? They are the passive voters and the consumers and others, okay? Now, each one of them really wants to act on that passive voter and consumer, that large mass. Bureaucratic hierarchism wants them to behave procedurally according to rules and laws that they have framed. Market wants them to behave freely and choose what they like, with all the blandishment that comes with advertising. And the activists, of course, don't like anything. And so they don't like the government, they don't like the market. And they're in the business of agitating to make sure that the masses follow or listen to what they have to say. Why I find this very interesting is now we go back to Lenin and Marx, and from my understanding from these 4 very different strands that I have just described to you, what I find out is that, by the way, when I say wolves, hawks, vultures, and donkeys, this comes from my good friend Jerry Marx, a cultural theorist in Cranfield University, who did his work on corruption and anthropologically studied how waiters cheat and how dockyard workers steal. He had this massive data interviewing tons and tons of people and didn't know what to do with it until he came across Michael Thompson, and the two sat down, and then they found out that the data fit these 4 quadrants, that you had 4 types of cheating waiters, 4 types of dockyard theft, and so on and so forth. And these corruptions he labeled hawk corruption, vulture corruption, wolf corruption, and donkey corruption. Okay, that's where the names come from, so just don't get too confused. I won't, this is a separate lecture altogether if I had to give that. Now, when you look at Marx's self-declared followers, right from Lenin up to Prachanda, what I see is now, what is Leninism? Okay, essentially, it was a term created by Stalin and others, you know, and just as Marx never said he was a Marxist, I don't think Lenin called himself a Leninist either. It was Stalin who did it afterwards for political reasons, and that has stuck. But Leninism is a style of organizing. And it's an organizing principle and philosophy, very effective, because there are lots of political movements that organized along Leninist principles and captured all kinds of power, state and otherwise. It's vanguard-led, not worker and peasant and all led at all. It's vanguard-led by professional change-making revolutionaries. They start off very egalitarian-wise. You know, there is something to rail against, whether it is the czars or whether it is the capitalists or whether it is your language is in danger or your religion is in danger, you name it, but it starts over here. Very quickly on Leninist principles, they become hierarchic internally. You know, one leader, deputy leader, deputy leader, and so on and so forth, okay? Now, what happens is it becomes an extremely powerful organizing principle. Okay, so you see that when you look at the top right-hand quadrant, it'll come in a second, I believe, right, automatically. Okay, the organizing principle of the wolves, you've seen National Geographic, you know how wolves hunt, you know, somebody attacks from this side, somebody from behind, and they bring down a much, much bigger animal than themselves. The hierarchic organizing style is extremely powerful. So the Leninist method of organizing, this vanguard business, is an extremely powerful way, and especially if the prey has been weakened. Let us not forget, I doubt personally if Lenin would have succeeded if the First World War had not happened and the Tsarist state was completely weakened. I doubt if Mao would have succeeded if Second World War had not happened and the Chinese state was completely rotten as it is, even more rotten, okay? But what this allows is it allows a Leninist formation, like a pack of wolves, organized, to go and bring down a much bigger prey, and they capture state power. Same happened also to some extent with the United Marxist-Leninists in Nepal, and subsequently, 20 years later, by the Maoists, okay? They very cleverly and carefully use the weaknesses of the state to do that, okay? Now, this is where the problem starts, okay? The problem starts here because they start as strong egalitarians and become very strong hierarchs that take over a bigger hierarchical formation under democratic centralism. Now, in the business of acquiring and holding to state power, they start making fantastic compromises. Lenin had to do that. Lenin had to bring in, under war communism, all the ex-Tsarist generals, and hire them, because they need to run this big machine. And they don't have people who know how to run it. And so the compromise starts with the old system. And it kind of ended with his new economic policy, where Armand Hammer, the American industrialist, I'd listened to his talk. He was actually given permission by Lenin to open factories in Russia under the new economic policy. So, you see, the flexibility is amazing, that you've captured state power, but you need to go back. We see the same problem of this double transition from a cultural theory perspective, egalitarian to hierarch, and then from small, powerful hierarch overcoming and taking over a bigger hierarchy. And what this does is the serious compromise in aspects of ideology, and that's best expressed by George Orwell's Animal Farm, I think, and also this absorbing of the old guards to run the bigger system. This loss of moral power and greater reliance on coercive power rather than moral or persuasive power is what leads to all that problem. I use that to explain Nepal's current predicament, and I'll close shortly. And I won't go into the details. Huh? Oh, okay. In 5 minutes, I'll just briefly list what I call Nepal's left pathology. Essentially, it started early. It started even in the 1990s with the United Marxist-Leninists. And what was amazing then to us, and I can go with a list that's so long, I mean, it'll take me a whole day to tell that, but I'll give you some snippets. One is the Nepali Congress government then in power and United Marxist-Leninists, UML or MLA as we call them, were in opposition. And under the Washington Consensus, the Congress government started privatizing all of Nepal's industries, whatever little we had, completely destroyed by now. Now, interesting, the UML had their cadres out in the streets like good communists protesting against privatization. So far, so good. I have no quarrel with that. That's your dharma, you do your dharma, okay, your religion, that's fine. But secretly, the General Secretary and others of the Communist Party were buying shares in those very companies. Now, this is where, the unraveling kind of starts. Recently, just 5 days ago, we have a law. It's a crazy law. I mean, I think it's really silly, and it gets sillier by the day. It is that if you become a minister, you have to make your property description public. Sounds nice, okay? But everybody knows this is nonsense, They have properties hidden away in names of Benami everywhere in town, okay? But what little they put out is stunning. The members of the current cabinet, both UML and Maoists, they are merged as one party, show, and as one journalist called me to say, brother, Dai, you and I don't qualify to become leaders of the proletariat. We don't have that much wealth, okay? But the wealth was phenomenal in one sense. Much of the wealth was listed as dowry that they got. Now, Nepal has a pretty draconian law against dowry. You get jailed for, 10 years or whatever, if you accept dowry. Well, here are leaders in the cabinet right now who have very openly, put down their property as dowry from their in-laws when they got married. Now, most of us know those in-laws, okay? And Nepal is a small place. And we know that they're not very rich people and they couldn't have given dowries like this. Okay. So this is just examples of some pathology. I started community electricity in Nepal when I was minister. Okay, that is giving, like community forest, giving the rights to small organized village groups to get electricity in bulk from the national grid and retail by themselves. There are amazing success stories. Women's group are running electricity systems in their villages because the men are all out-migrated and doing such a damn good job of it. Training women electricians and, oh God, it's something that makes you proud, okay? But the Maoist government tried to shut it down. They couldn't shut it down because there are 300 of them across Nepal and they're pretty powerful, these groups. But they tried to shut it down. Why did they try to shut it down? You would have thought a Maoist would love community electricity, communist, Mao's communes, come on. Why did they try? Because all these guys would come to me and say, they try to shut us down, what do we do, It turns out that they don't like community electricity, Maoists though they are, because it is an organizing principle in the village that is outside their Politburo chain of command and control. So this authoritarian streak and this streak of trying to, control everything and rely on coercive power is beginning to show. I can go on with the list. Our constitution is very defective. And there's so many contradictions coming up. And there's a whole section of Maoists who are outside, who have left that Prachanda Baburam, the Biplab Baidya group, who are definitely ideologically more clear and don't accept the current constitution and don't accept the parliamentary bourgeois form of democracy as they call it, okay? So they're back to now trying to figure out how they start a people's war all over again. I hope it doesn't come to that, but they have a point that if you started a people's war against the 1990 constitution, against a parliamentary democracy, and now you go back to a parliamentary democracy, you're going to have a lot of disgruntled followers. And we have interviewed about 1,000 ex-Maoist combatants. And the kind of anger that I have heard from them is, I'm surprised that Nepal is still such a peaceful country. Okay. Right is also simultaneously getting galvanized and around issues of religion. Now, this is something that should not have been touched. We should have gone for the Thai model, where the Thai constitution says the king of Thailand is a Buddhist, but he's the protector of all religions. Now, what we did was got rid of the king, got rid of Hindu state, and said Nepal is secular. Now, if they had only said in the constitution Nepal is secular, I would say, okay, I may not personally agree with it, but what the hell, okay, you did it, okay? But you know what they've done? And not many of you know this because Indian journalism has completely failed as far as Nepal is concerned and don't even report this. The Nepali constitution says, this current one, Nepal is a secular state and has a footnote. And the footnote says, for the purpose of this constitution, secularism is defined as the protection of Sanatan traditions. Now, Sanatan is this very traditional name for Hinduism, by the way. Huh? Now, how much more contradictory can you get than this? So what has happened now is that, the right was already mad about this, and now you have Yogi Adityanath sitting just, 1 hour away from Nepal border by car as Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. And what has happened is in 2008, when we had done a survey, when the new Constituent Assembly came and they sidelined the king, the people who wanted Nepal to be Hindu state, even if a republic, was 56%. Now that figure has gone up to 74%. So what is this contradiction? How are our Maoists and the left coping with this? Well, Baburam has just taken his mother on a Char Dham pilgrimage all over India. Well, you say religion is the opium of the people, and how do you go on a Char Dham? And Prachanda, some time back, somebody told him his Saturn was bad and he was not becoming Prime Minister, actually went to the Kosi and did a Saturn worship with a bhains. I'm not joking, this has all happened. So with these kind of contradictions, the Nepali left, I end with this, are they red, pink or blue? My answer is, as extreme pragmatists, and you might call them opportunists, they're all three. Thank you.
That was a stunning performance. I think the answer is the Nepali left wing is a rainbow coalition. It's got every color under the sun. Okay, questions, quickly. Yeah, gentleman at the very back there, if anybody can get to him.
You'll have to say really louder because all the
speakers are there. Okay, yes, yes. Okay. Yes. Yes, get on with it, yeah. Are there no working mics in this place? What's going on?
Okay. Hello.
Yeah, come on.
Thank you. My question is that I want to know about what role Communist Party of Nepal has played in the transition from feudalism to democratization of Nepal. Because hello, yeah. My impression
That's a question.
is that
That's a good question, and that's good.
And the second question is just, it seems to me that
We're not interested in what seems to you. You asked a question, he'll answer. Thank you.
Let me finish.
Next question.
Let me finish.
Next question.
Let me finish.
Yeah, next question.
My impression is that we were listening the anti-communist propaganda material.
Please,
prepared
I
by
said to
reactionary
you,
group.
we are not interested in your answer. We are interested in his answer. Yes, gentleman there. I'm going to be very strict.
Yeah, the Communist Party.
Question.
The Communist Party of Nepal was close to a 2/3 majority. Now with Matrika Prasad Yadav joining them, now they have a 2/3 majority in parliament. So do you think that the Communist government, the Communist Party of Nepal government is in a position to take certain policy measures? And
Thank
if
you.
So what?
Thank you. Okay, anybody else want to ask a question? Of course not. What do you think I'm here for? This is a hierarchical system. Okay, yeah, answer those two questions. Answer those two questions, you might extract some more.
Okay.
I'm not having anybody.
the role of the Nepal Communist Party on democratization is actually secondary to Nepali Congress. And I would personally say it's even secondary to King Birendra. Because the Nepal Communist Party has always played a secondary role till recently, when they have really won this so-called two-third majority. So, yeah, you might say, now, I'll tell you one more thing. The Nepal Communist Party, UML, currently owns, in quotes, about 70% of all the NGOs in Nepal, funded by international donors. So, if they win elections, they go in the parliament. They lose elections, they come and join the NGO thing and get all their salaries from there, okay? So, yes, you would consider that democratization, I would, okay? So, they have a role in that sense. But it's secondary to Nepali Congress, because the history of Nepali Congress fighting for democracy is much, much longer. And the role of the late King Birendra in actually ending a system peacefully is also as great when he restored the multi-party system in Nepal. So that has to really be taken into account. Now, I'm not a communist, so definitely what I speak will not be very pro-communist anyway, so that might answer your question. The second one, Nepal Communist Party, the union between UML and the Maowadi, they have with not Matrika Yadav, it's Upendra Yadav. Matrika had already joined before. Upendra Yadav had become the leader of the Madhes movement. There were three major factions. The Madhes movement, after the blockade by India, has collapsed. And as a result, Vijay Garshadar has gone back to joining the Nepali Congress, the three factions. The second was Upendra Yadav, and now he's gone and joined his old UML Maoist group. It leaves only Mahanta Thakur, which is really, and about 5 or 7 fraction parties, which is nowhere. Now, yes, they have the legislative two-third majority, they could even change the constitution if they wanted to. And the constitution is very, very flawed. We have had local elections to these new bodies they created. It's already over a year and almost a year and a half they've been elected, and nothing is moving. Because the constitution is so contradictory, no one knows what powers lie in the local bodies. There are no rules, regulations. And the locally elected provincial and municipal governments are just completely befuddled, okay? Now, in principle, Oli government right now, with the Maoist and Upendra Yadav, could sort this out. There is very little sign of their doing it. And primarily the reason is because the contradiction in the cadres of their own parties is so high. They had a Lenin anniversary the other day, where Prachanda and on 22nd April, Prachanda and Oli were to address it. The whole meeting had to be delayed by 7 hours because their cadres had come to blows over the banner that should be put up. So this is the United Party. So to expect that these guys will easily pass rational good laws would be hypothetical.
Yeah.
1 minute.
Cynthia.
One
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah, okay.
Hello. The learned speaker has completely overlooked.
No, question. What's your question?
I am putting the question, please listen. He has completely overlooked the great struggle that the Nepali Communist Party has conducted in villages and demolished feudalism and liberated the poorest of the section. He has completely overlooked.
What's your question?
That is the question. He has,
What is
they
your
have done
question?
something, so they have come in the power.
Okay. Cynthia? Yeah.
I wanted to know if is there a quota for women's participation in the party? Is there one also for any of the offices that are held and anyone reaching near 50%?
Okay. Any more? One more? Yes. Yes. What's the question?
Let me start, sir.
Yes.
You have presented a theoretical model movement from egalitarianism to hierarchy, wolf style, then capturing the bigger hierarchical power. Do you see that despite the ideological force of communism or communist philosophy or whatever, people who gave their lives in that, there is something inevitable about this transition from egalitarianism to hierarchy, which will then degenerate into all these horrible contradictions? Or do you see a possibility of this transition taking place into a more positive way? Even if you're not communist, you will like to have that positive transition to take place. And that depends on understanding of human psychology, incentives, etc. Would you like to bring that theoretical dimensions into it?
Good.
Answer?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, great. Nice questions. First, I wish you'd go back to Nepal and see the villages. They are being emptied right now. It has not been removed of feudalism. On the contrary, Nepali youth have been forced to migrate to the Gulf and Malaysia and Korea in droves. We have a population of 28 million. Right now, not taking India into account, where informal migration of Nepalis as labor was always there, we have something like 6 million Nepalis in the Gulf, Malaysia and Korea. 6 million out of a population of 28, which is practically at least one youth from every house, at least. Which means that Nepal's proletarization is not taking place in Nepal, never did. It is taking place in the sands of Arabia right now. And the presentation by Barbara and others about this surplus extraction is going on in an amazing rate, and what is happening in Nepal is neo-feudalism. So what has happened is the old feudals are finished, but there's a new feudal class that has emerged, mostly associated with the parties, Nepali Congress and the communist parties, by the way. Okay? And these come in terms of manpower companies. These are manpower, we call them, manpower dalal. Huh? So these are all owned by senior party people across the political spectrum, mostly Congress and Nepal and the communists, okay? Exporting labor out. Okay? So as a result, the country is completely dependent on a dust disease phenomenon of remittance economy. 30% of our GDP comes from remittance, which is dust disease impact. God help us if anything happens in the Middle East. With Trump, you never know. Okay? So, in a sense, the feudalism in the villages have not been destroyed by neither the communists nor the Congress. It has been replaced by neo-feudalism of a much more dangerous type. The quota for women, yeah, the Nepali constitution in that sense is way too progressive. In the sense, it's got a very complicated mixture of how you can even nominate to that your quota to the parliament. There's 60% you are directly elected, and depending on how many votes the parties get, from that they can nominate that many people to the thing. But there's a quota on that. So much have to be women, so much have to be Dalits, so much have to be from the marginal ethnic groups and so on. Huh? There's a case in the Supreme Court right now. The united UML and the Maoist party have united, and they're having a hard time registering with the Election Commission, because there too there is a quota that there should be 33% women in your central committee. They could barely get 10%. So the question is, can they be even registered as a party now? Now that applies. It's well-meaning, and they have put all kinds of quotas, but the question is it practical? In the villages I have seen and where I have studied, we used to have a ward citizen forum where they had similar quotas, so many women, so many Dalits, so many, this thing must be there, and the budget too must be allocated in a similar way, okay? What happened was, the women quota, yeah, you got some woman coming in there, but the point was, she was totally beholden to whatever her husband or her father-in-law said. So in a sense, it was an extension, but even then, that's still better than not having them. That's what I would say, okay? Eventually, they'll learn and then they start asserting themselves. It may take a generation, but that's good. So there is that provision, and it's quite actually progressive. So the Constitution does have that. It's just that the parties cannot, and society cannot find that many women to fill that position. And that's the problem, okay? And how they handle it, I don't know. On this whole ideological force and the inevitable degeneration, I'm only putting down what is seen there. It's sort of a measured fact down there. Why it is happening, why inevitable, I have my own hypothesis or hunch in trying to approach this, and I lay it down. It's like this, there's a whole section that wants to restore it. When the monarchy was removed, the survey showed that 49% of the people wanted the monarchy, 42% did not. No, hold on, let me answer. 42% of the people did not want the monarchy and 49% wanted a monarchy when the monarchy was removed. Which is why the parties did not opt for a referendum. Because had they opted for the referendum, then it looked like the monarchy might stay. So they opted for very devious means of removing the monarchy, including scuttling what Manmohan Singh, Karan Singh agreement with the king was. As a result, it has delegitimized the current system and made the monarchists very strong, getting stronger. So just for your information, okay. Now, on the inevitable degeneration, there are other aspects of this degeneration coming in, and that is coming from precisely, I think, a very weak ideological commitment. If you look at the political parties, Maoist and UML, the leadership is entirely top high-class Brahmin. Okay? There have been very few, I have known only two senior communist leaders, both of them unfortunately have passed away. One was Nirmal Lama from a very backward community, and one was Ruplal Biswakarma from the Dalit community. These were the only two senior communists in the kind of the history of Nepal. Essentially, they're all high caste hill Brahmins, or Tarai Brahmins for that matter. You know? So this is where the contradictions of the society come to visit you back, and eventually you see the kind of degeneration that's going on. Okay?
Thank you very much. Not quite end, but this has been a good last afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gyawali, and thank you, Lord Desai.